I call the Honourable David Parker.
Here, Mr Speaker. We are here today in March 2010. We're approximately halfway through the term of the National Government. In a month or two, we have the Minister of Finance delivering the second out of his three budgets. Right. And so it's really time for us to, in this Parliament, look at how the National Government is performing. Yeah. And I think we should look at a couple of questions. We should look at the time of this budget fiscal update. How are they doing? Are they achieving what they said to electors that they would achieve? Are they keeping or breaking their promises, and how's the future looking? And I suppose the first point to be made when you're looking at the budget policy statement is you have some focus on the performance of the Minister of Finance. And one thing I would say at the start is that he is a very backward-looking Minister of Finance. Yeah. He spends his whole time, even now, coming up to his second budget, looking back and inventing criticisms of the last government rather than advancing the interests of our country. And we heard it again today. Again, he was out there with the Crosby text-to-speech saying that the last Labour-led government had 9 years of economic mismanagement. Now that befalls upon me, as with prior speakers, just to show how ridiculous that assertion is. We reduced government debt very significantly. Gross debt down from 38% of GDP to under 20% of GDP, 17.7 at the time of the election. We reduced net debt down to virtually nothing. Unemployment was amongst the lowest in the world, 3.4%. And growth in New Zealand during that period was higher on average than it was in the United States, in the whole of Europe, in Japan and United Kingdom, and indeed during the period of our government it was virtually identical to the growth during the same period in Australia. So it was a very strong economic performance. Perhaps the Minister of Finance has been so backward-looking because it is true, I think, it's a matter of public record, and I don't take pleasure in saying that, but he's been more than beset with his own irregularities and problems in terms of claims to household accommodation for his personal budget, and he's taken off his eye off his more important responsibilities as Minister of Finance. So he's clearly had a horror year. What are the government doing in terms of achieving what they promised New Zealanders they would achieve? Well, what did they promise? They promised a step change in the New Zealand economy. That was their first promise. They promised to close the income gap with Australia, and they promised to rebalance the economy towards the tradable sector. Now, what meaningful steps have they taken towards those goals? What meaningful changes have they made? And the answer is sadly none. None. Now, I accept that infrastructure is important. I think on this side of the House, we clearly accept that. Indeed, we were the government that markedly increased spending on infrastructure. We were the ones that actually started to improve our roading and public transport infrastructure. We were the ones that made progress towards broadband, which has sort of stalled since this government came in. We were the ones that actually made the necessary investments through SOEs and also the other private sector electricity companies in electricity generation and in transmission. There has been no step change there since the election. Let's turn to the next big lever that can be pulled. The government called a review of the taxation system. That was a wise thing to do. Yep. It was unwise to actually get it and then effectively trash its contents. It was a ruse because what in the end the Minister of Finance has done is what national governments always do. In the end, stripped to the basics, they are increasing the tax burden of low and middle income groups and decreasing the tax paid proportionately or more than proportionately by those who already earn the most.
That's right.
That's what they always do. That's what they've done this year. That's what New Zealanders know they're doing, and New Zealanders know that that breaks a promise made during the election that they would not increase GST. More importantly, perhaps, or as importantly, I won't say more importantly, because there's nothing worse than a broken promise, but certainly importantly, it doesn't go anywhere towards rebalancing the New Zealand economy. Now, on this side, we actually agree with the Minister of Finance that New Zealand's economy has been and remains imbalanced. We invest too much in property. We do not invest enough in the productive sector. The tax levers should have been pulled to help rebalance the economy. They have not been. The leadership shown by the government in this area is wrong. It is bad for two reasons. One, their economic ideology is so simplistic. Essentially, it's unsophisticated, and it says you should tax high-income people more and middle and high-income people less and middle and low-income people more. That's their ideology. Their ideology relates to taxation rather than management of the economy. So they're failing to achieve a step change in New Zealand. In terms of closing the gap with Australia, it's widening in every area except one, and that's unemployment. And it's should be of no pleasure to the government that one area where it's narrowing with Australia, it's going in the wrong direction, having inherited a lower unemployment rate than is the case in Australia, or was the case in Australia. New Zealand has now moved to a position of our unemployment growing while theirs has been dropping. So we've caught up on unemployment by getting a worse unemployment record, and in every other way we are doing worse. There's another area of important policy where the government sits on its hands, and that relates to monetary policy. Last year, the Labour Party said we no longer agreed with the current monetary policy settings, and we said the consensus has broken down. At the time, we had both the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance saying, no, we're wrong, it is all hunky-dory, it's all hunky-dory, it's all perfect, we've got the best monetary policy in the world. Well, what's happened in the last month? Actually, the International Monetary Fund has actually come out with a report and said that we and Labour are right, and the National Party is wrong on this. They point out and highlight the difficulties caused to the tradable sector, to the real economy, by the consequences of existing monetary policy that we have in New Zealand. They point out that the damage that it's done through imbalances and risks that it creates in the financial sector, but also the difficulties that are faced by our tradable sector, our exporters facing a volatile exchange rate. Still, the National Party sits on its hands and does nothing. So if we look at that, how are they doing? Well, the answer is not well. How's the future looking? The future is looking increasingly dire for New Zealand. Right. The latest Treasury and Reserve Bank forecasts show our current account deficit increasing. Indeed, in the next couple of years, more than doubling from where it currently is. What that means is if it's predicted it goes back to 7.2% of GDP, every year New Zealand is losing our sovereignty. Every year more of our main enterprises are owned by overseas interests. Every year as a country we are getting poorer, not by a small amount, but by a predicted 7.2% of GDP per annum. So far from rebalancing the economy so as to encourage exports, savings and investment, the imbalances are on the rise. Right. The imbalances are on the rise. So the national government is leading New Zealand towards a repeat of the worst excesses in consumption and property-related investment, because they haven't done anything meaningful to change the policy settings. So New Zealand will have a future where we have poor savings. They've undermined KiwiSaver. They've done nothing to fix it. We've got inadequate savings. We've got monetary policy settings which see New Zealand enterprises paying higher interest rates than their competitors overseas. They suffer the double detriment of a volatile exchange rate, of interest rates that are higher than are paid by the businesses that are competing to buy those same assets in New Zealand. New Zealand businesses' competitiveness decreases. We see the hollowing out of the New Zealand economy, and we see the gap between New Zealand and Australia get worse. Indeed, we see more and more of New Zealand being owned by Australia, being owned by other companies from other jurisdictions, including China, and we see the hollowing out of the New Zealand economy. We see New Zealanders getting poorer. We see the gap between New Zealand and Australia growing, the exact opposite of what was promised. Here we have it. We're coming up to the second budget, and the government is not achieving what it told the New Zealand electors it would.
Very good.